Oh, wow. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sophie Black. I'm editor-in-chief of Crikey. And everyone, it's going to be okay because Kara Swisher is here to explain everything.
What?
Kara for president, I believe that's what that was.
No.
But first of all, welcome to Story Hall. The Wheeler Centre is really proud to be working with RMIT Culture tonight in this incredible space. RMIT Culture is dedicated to building a community of culture and ideas, and part of that is treating us to nights like tonight. And before we kick off, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge any First Nations people with us here tonight. And I pay my respect to elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. Now, I can sense a lot of excitement in the room, maybe a bit of neediness, but we're going to resist the urge to treat this as a therapy session. Now, you'll get a chance to ask Kara some questions at the end of the chat by uploading them to Slido via the QR code that has just popped up there. So don't worry, you will get your chance. I will not hog Kara. Kara, I'm not spending too much time on your bio. We know who you are. Host of numerous essential listening podcasts, co-founder and editor-in-chief of Recode, co-executive producer of the Code Conference, stints at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, author of 3 books, of which Burn Book is the latest. All of it boils down to decades of covering Silicon Valley, making Kara one of the most well-placed people in the world to make sense of what is happening right now. So one more round of applause for Kara.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you just called me old, but that's okay.
Okay, I want you to cast your mind back to what feels like thousands of years ago, but it's in fact only 6 weeks. The second inauguration of Donald J. Trump.
Yeah.
What was your first thought when you saw the likes of Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Sam Altman sitting ringside that day?
Well, interestingly, Sam Altman and Tim Cook were hiding in the back, if you noticed. I actually asked because in that panoply of stooges, and that's what it was, someone told me when I was watching it, and I said this last night in Sydney, why have fuck you money if you can't say fuck you, right? Like,
yeah.
They really do have fuck you money several times over. So I was interested in why he moved the thing inside. It wasn't the cold. He wanted to have that show. He's a television person, and Trump is very crafty that way, and he wanted, where he placed them was super interesting to me, like right next to each other. And so they had Jeff and his fiancée Lauren, Mark, and Elon. I thought Elon would be there in a prominent place, but I didn't think he would put them quite like that. And then Mark's wife was next to him, Priscilla. And then somehow Sundar Pichai got stuck in there. And I think that was the Tim Cook seat. And I think somehow Tim Cook engineered to hide in the back behind a lady with big hair. You didn't see him. It was really interesting. And so I talked to someone at Apple. I'm like, how did that happen? Because they'd want him in front. And they said the greatest feat of engineering in history, which was kind of funny. So in any case, they were there, right? So there were pictures of them. They were trying very hard, some of them were trying hard, others wanted to be there and preen and show their fealty to Trump. And Trump very much wanted to put them there to show he had control over these oligarchs, essentially. And so the whole thing was such a performative bunch of nonsense that it was really, I was just fascinated to see how far some of them had fallen. Some of them I fully expected them to behave like this, because like a Mark Zuckerberg, for example, who's never had any values that I can discern. And it was depressing to watch. You know, it was depressing to watch, because here, I think it had a nice bookend from the beginning of this book where they go to Trump Tower, even after objecting to him vehemently and saying nothing about immigration and all the attacks that Trump had made against tech. And they all ran up there. And that's how the book opens, you know, of them doing this in 2016. And I myself am shocked by this behavior. And then that they did that, I was not, by this time, I'm like, oh, I see. They're like pigs feeding at the trough, essentially.
So in the last 24 hours, we've been...
That's an insult to pigs. So.
Yeah. In the last 24 hours, we've been treated to images of Trump addressing Congress, and during that very, very, very long speech, he throws to the head of Doge a couple of times.
Yeah, he calls him the head of Doge. He's not supposed to, because in court, he has said he's not the head of Doge, and then they found some lady that they keep putting a picture up of, but he kept calling him the head of Doge, which he's not supposed to do.
I will refer to him...
He is the head of Doge. It's
I will
so ridiculous.
refer to him as Elon Musk from now on.
I call it, just so you know, I call it doggy. So just call it that.
We'll call it Doggy for the rest of the night.
All right, good.
So he throws to Elon, the head of Doggy, several times. Elon stands to a part standing ovation.
No, it wasn't a standing ovation. That would everybody in the room. It was half the room.
Half the room. But it threw to a few people, through to a few different people. There was Elizabeth Warren kind of staring down at her phone. There was Nancy Pelosi. It does feel a bit like people have whiplash. Would you have predicted that things would have played out as fast as they have?
Yes, I did predict it in the book. So yes, I thought, I was very, the shift to Elon, when the book came out last year, I was on a bunch of shows and they were talking about, Elon buying Twitter, and that's where he really was, and he was sort of misbehaving all over Twitter. But he hadn't really supported Trump at all, really. Just a little bit every now and then, but not in the way he's obviously jumped in. And I went on a show, I think it was Jen Psaki's show, and she goes, what do you think Elon will do in this election? I'm like, support Trump. And she goes, oh, but he said he's going to be neutral. I said, well, his mouth is moving, so he's lying. So he's absolutely going to support Trump. And my theory was that a lot of his companies have investigations all over the map, and if Kamala Harris wins, he's in big trouble from a regulatory point of view, from a legal point of view, from an investigations point of view, and that his only way out is for Donald Trump to win and him to kiss up to Donald Trump, because he could get in a position of power, and he can make those investigations go away, which he has done. If you notice, a lot of his cuts with Doggy are in agencies that were investigating his various companies. So it was very critical for him, from an existential point of view, that Kamala Harris not win.
Certainly that was said of Donald Trump himself as well. It was a self-preservation exercise.
Yeah, of course, he wanted to stay out of jail. Yeah.
But for Musk, you think it was self-preservation that trumped, so to speak, everything over the opportunity, but what about in terms of the access Musk has since, I
think that people have been surprised by that. I did an interesting interview with Maggie Haberman, who's covered Trump for many years from the New York Times, and she thought it would be over once he got to the White House. She's like, the Trump officials don't think he's going to get, because he had embedded himself in Mar-a-Lago. He got himself a bungalow there, and he was hanging out there all the time. And you saw the photographs of him on New Year's Eve at Mar-a-Lago. Again, I said this last night in Sydney, if you're the world's richest person and that's where you spend New Year's, I could think of a lot of other places I would spend New Year's if I was the world's richest man, and that would be, I don't know, never. I would never spend. And so it was kind of vaguely pathetic what he was doing. But they thought he would be gone after that period of time, and then he's since attached himself like a remora fish to Trump, and Trump likes it because he's useful to Trump as an enforcer. I had posited he's like a heat shield, that he's taking all the crap Trump would have taken and doing things that Trump would have been unable to do, and none of his minions would have been able to do. Either because they were too scared or they didn't have the personality. And so in a lot of ways, Elon is channeling Stephen Miller. And if you notice, his wife, Katie Miller, is working for Doggy. So it's really interesting, because Stephen Miller is such a, he's like Nosferatu, and he doesn't have any charm, or nobody likes him. And Elon can take negative attention, and he's so famous. It's a really useful, for Trump, it's incredibly useful. It's also a cudgel to people who are against him, If you cross him, he's going to primary you, and here's my rich friend who's going to pay for that and stuff. So he's a very useful, I mean, there's been nothing, it's unprecedented that he has, that his junkyard dog is so wealthy kind of stuff. So it's really quite disturbing in a lot of ways.
You pivoted from starting out very early in your career covering politics to deciding to cover tech. Did you ever foresee those worlds colliding so perfectly in the way that they have?
It's why I moved back to Washington from San Francisco, because I really there was a book by Steve Case, who I'd written my first book about AOL, and it was about the transition of tech into analog in a lot of ways, and the collision when all this new tech had to do with things like cars and healthcare and space travel. So there was an analog digital marriage happening, and a lot of it needed regulatory scrutiny. A lot of what was going to happen, it moved beyond, a computer with software on it would have profound effects. And so when you saw the effects that social media had on our society, the reason I started doing columns for the New York Times was because I wanted people to notice how powerful these entities had become and how much they were affecting the body politic. And so I started writing about that back in 2017, because I was very worried about the impact that these companies had on our society at large right after the Trump election, because I felt like he was the candidate who was elected by tech, really, in a lot of ways. And the reason why he got elected is because of Facebook and other social media. And so, very similar into the way that FDR in radio and John F. Kennedy in television, Trump was the social media president. He really was. Everyone attributes it to Obama, but not at all. Obama was tech-friendly, too tech-friendly, actually. But Trump was not that. Trump is the social media president.
A few people, you wrote in the book that a few people suggested you were a bit of a downer for voicing those concerns.
Yes, I was a downer. Yeah.
As if to suggest that tech needed any kind of regulation.
Right.
was a bit eye-rolly.
Yeah, they've got a very up and to the right personality trait, which is sometimes good, right?
Yeah.
And that's sometimes really good, except my feeling was that they have businesses where they don't have any consequences, or they don't have to pay for the consequences. And every other business, whether it's the media business or pharmaceutical or a car, if a steering wheel doesn't work, the car company gets sued. If a drug hurts kids or something like that, they get sued. What really struck me, for example, we had an incident in the United States where a door blew off an Alaska Airlines flight, right? And terrible thing to have happen if you're in a plane. And what happened in the wake of that was lawsuits, federal and state investigations, the changes in the law and how to do these things, and the CEO was fired. One door, just one door. It doesn't happen that much, right? And it was really amazing that companies like Facebook and all the others had no repercussions for the damage they caused anywhere in the world, whether it was Myanmar or here in this country with elections. And so I was really struck by where were the regulators on the world's the 10 most powerful rich people in the world are tech people, except for the Saudis. And the 10 most powerful companies in the world are tech companies by far. And I was sort of amazed that this group of people never paid the societal costs of the damage they did. And so I felt like I needed to really get to know Washington people and try to urge them to do something.
Because there is no real significant, there's not a single piece of significant.
There's none. I don't care what they tell you. Yeah. I mean, crypto, yes, there were some strictures because it was a Ponzi scheme / casino, and now it's back to that under Trump. And so money is something people get funny about, right? We don't want to have that go haywire. Currency, especially the U.S. dollar, and also healthcare is another area that's hasn't innovated as much from a technology point of view because there's HIPAA and things like that. But I had there were no rules, and and it wasn't just there were no regulations. There was also no liability. Like that's the other counter in our country, lawyers suing, right? So they had no liability. They're the richest people in the world. There's no regulations, and they're jerks. And I was like, oh my God, we're fucked. So I went and met all the, the Elizabeth Warrens, the Amy Klobuchars, the Senator Warners, and on the Republican side, there were a number too of people who were concerned about this growing power. But now the Republicans are embracing it because they have Elon Musk.
I'm going to refer back to the book and go right back to when you start out in journalism, because it's a simpler time and it's much nicer there. How did you get your first gig in journalism?
First job? I was in college. I went to college a little early. I was younger when I went there, and I worked for the college newspaper. And I was writing about a speaker that came to the campus, that typical story, so-and-so. And it was a guy I really hated from Nicaragua. He was a killer. And he came, his name was Roberto Dobuizon. He was a murderer. I was a colonel. And the Washington Post did a story too, but it was full of errors, and it drove me crazy. I was really mad because I hated this guy because he was a killer. He was behind the killing of those nuns. It was El Salvador, sorry, it wasn't Nicaragua. And there I made a mistake. But I just corrected myself. See, that's how journalism works.
For the record.
That's how journalism works when it works. And so I got angry about the story, not thinking like they didn't send their finest people to cover a Georgetown University speech. That never occurred to me in my 18-year-old brain. But I got angry and I called up the Post because I love the Washington Post. I read it every day. I thought it was a great newspaper. And I said, how dare you write such a terrible story? Like I literally said that, you suck, like essentially. And the person I got on the phone was the Metro editor who had assigned this story. I don't know how I got through to him, but I did. And he said, you want to come down there and say it to my face? And I said, I will. And so I did. I got on a bus and I went down there. It was a straight shot of a bus down to the Post on 15th Street. And I walked in and I gave him a piece of my mind, and he hired me. So he's like, you think you could do it better? I said, so much better, and so they hired me as a stringer, and then I also worked at night as a night news aide, which was just, you take calls from crazy people, essentially. And I brought copy down to the presses. They have the presses at the Post at the time. It was lovely, actually. And so I did all that and sort of worked my way up. That's what I did. I really am the person who started in the mailroom. And I loved it. And I oddly enough, I delivered mail for people who later worked for me, and they didn't know it. I was like, you never picked up your mail. So it was an interesting, it was a great place to be, and I loved the Washington Post. And just, it was a really exciting time to be there, because it was sort of it was an exciting time to be there. Amazing writers, all kinds of people. And Ben Bradley was the editor, and he was just a legend. And it was just, and then as I got better and better, they wanted me to go, I was covering retail, and I broke a lot of stories around this billionaire family. I'm always with the billionaires, family who was fighting with each other, and I wrote this series of stories. And they wanted me then, because I was promising, to cover the White House. That was where they wanted me to go. And I did not want to cover the White House. I thought all those people were so up in each other's face, and it was so compromised, and nobody really covered it well, and it was gross. And because I had to cover parties for the style section, so I got to see all that. Yeah. And I was like, this is not journalism. This is something else. It's back scratching. It's weird. And so I didn't like it, and I didn't think it was journalism, and so I started covering America Online, which was in Vienna, Virginia, near Washington. And so, and the minute I started covering that was it. I was done. And it also formed my opinion about how the Washington Post was fucked. Like, I got to get out of here because they were making all the wrong choices. And I thought, I had been a student of media, and you could see this was...
They weren't keeping up.
No, it wasn't not keeping up. They couldn't keep up. That it was impossible in a digitized environment, because this is getting a little complex, but there were three stools of the business. There was I had covered retail. Retail was drying up. All the local retailers were dying, and chains like Walmart were coming in and not advertising. Classifieds sucked, and it was a terrible business. It was a great business until it was a terrible business. And then the internet was going to have information all over it. So what was your advantage as a newspaper? And so, and subscriptions, why would people pay when all the news was free? And so I kept saying this as a 20-something at the Washington Post, and they like, oh, how cute, computers. And I was like, no, they're going to kill you. And they didn't listen to me.
But you really were, in those early days of covering tech, explaining the internet to people. And
I was.
And you, I want to kind of go back to what arrested your imagination so much about it, because it wasn't glamorous.
No.
It was pretty daggy.
Yes. No, even at the Journal, they weren't that interested in it at all. And I kept saying, I felt like I was John the Baptist. I was like, this is going to change everybody's business. Like, it's so obvious. And I think anytime, it's sort of like being there when television started, or movies, or talkies. You're like, guess what, silent people, you're fucked. Like, and I kept saying that. I was so irritating, but I was like, this is gonna, I could just see, like, I kept saying everything that can be digitized will be digitized.
Yeah.
And people got irritated by me. And I'm like, it's obviously it's gonna get like music. And I kept saying things like that. I used to run over there, had a teletype machine, like one of those, it was really fun, right? They're really fun, but it was going, and I'm like, you're not gonna need this. Like, and I go, you're not gonna need this. And then I point to a telephone, I'm like, you're definitely not gonna need that. Like, and then what do you think is gonna happen to all those people who work there? And you're not gonna need this. And paper, what do you need paper for? There's no such thing as paper. Like, and they found me irritating when I was doing that.
And you've, in the book, you quote like pieces that you were writing. So you were describing how homepages work.
Homepages, right.
And there's one report about that you wrote, you say that you wrote it quite breathlessly, about people putting @ symbols on their business cards.
Yes, that was a big deal. I had to write a story that, like, I think the lead was, you're not somebody if you're not anybody if you're not somebody.com. So bad.
So, what was it about it that kept you hooked?
I never left tech after that, because I could have done anything, like, really. There's moments in history where, like, if you were there and you met, like, Thomas Edison, like, or you met the people who created Hollywood, the original people, not the later people, or you met, like, any of these great moments in history, they exist when you're there. And I met them when they weren't anybody, like Jeff Bezos. I went and helped him look for his office for the first time, or Zuckerberg when he was 19 years old, or always a jerk, let me just say. He's a jerk at 19, he's a jerk today. It's the same person. He has progressed exactly this much as a person. When and I spent a lot of time with Steve Jobs too, who was it was so exciting to be able to talk to that person, because historically, you're talking to someone is a legend, right? Who's going to be a legend. And so I was very attuned to how important it was, and it was such a contrast to Washington, where they didn't make anything. They didn't create, and to be at the dawn of that is, but not the money part, because I was offered jobs at all those companies early, and I said no to every one of them like an idiot. But really, I've been really rich. I'd have been really rich. You'd be like, Kara, you're so rich right now, but I wasn't. So I could tell I was historically in a place where I'm a student of history. I knew exactly what was happening.
But it seems like you didn't lose your cynicism despite your excitement and your enthusiasm. So if we go from, like, the dagginess of the AOL days,
I would use the term skepticism. Cynicism. I love tech. That's not what it is. It's like, I think, that kind of thing. So it was sort of, you went from AOL to, like, an industrial park, like, covering there, to, say, the heady days of Google and the don't be evil era of Google, say. Right, they tried to get me to write that essay, actually, the two of them. I mean, it was hilarious.
To literally pen the essay.
Oh, yeah, he called me up and he said, I have this saying, don't be evil, and can you write Google's manifesto? And I said, no, I'm covering you, I can't do that. And don't be evil, that's pretty far down it leaves you a wide swath of shit you could do between be good and don't be evil. I was like, I feel like you're tricking people, and they were. And he didn't like that. He's like, whoa, it's a really good thing. I'm like, no, then you could do anything else but evil. And evil's like killing people. So you could damage people and it's not evil. It was a mistake kind of stuff. And so, they were, sorry, I missed I'm losing my train of thought, but I wanted to be part of it and not be part of it. And so it was very easy to cover them because you got so much access to these people and you got to see them in the before times. And that was really important to me.
You wrote a piece around that era, I think, called The Lies of Silicon Valley.
Yes, that was one of my first pieces for the journal.
What were the lies of Silicon Valley back then?
Well, when you get anywhere, you kind of like look around and talk to people as a reporter. I think it's really important. I always advised young reporters, like, just get in there and meet everybody. And I went to lunch with everybody. I talked to everybody. I was an excellent beat reporter, like one of those, like, nobody was like, I went to talk to everybody. And so one of the things that I noticed was all these, everywhere you go in every industry, there's a bullshit factor of things people wear and that they think are unique and they all look alike, right? That's always interesting. I have dressed the same since 7th grade, just so you know. And then there's things they say to you that's just such bullshit. But I like to see what they lie. And one of the things I learned as a reporter is, when you start, you're like, what are they lying to me about? What are they lying to me about? And then I got more sophisticated, which was, what are they lying to themselves about? What are the lies they need to tell themselves to get through the day? And it's a much more sophisticated way to consider people. And so they would say things like, there's no titles here. That was there's no titles, we're all equal. I'm like, equal, interesting, you own all the stock, so not equal, right? Or why would they say that when it wasn't true? Like, that was interesting to me. And then they'd have these ridiculous juvenile titles like Chief Yahoo. What the fuck is that? Or I'm the CEO, bitch. Like, what are you, 12? Yes, in fact, you are. So
that was that. Just to
that was
stop
on
you there,
Mark's. That was on Mark's. I have it. I have that card.
That was on Mark Zuckerberg's.
He thought it was so funny.
Business card.
Yeah. He's like, did you see my thing? I'm like, and I pretend I didn't see. I'm like, no, I didn't. Did you have something on there? Like, I would drive him crazy. Like, because he thought he was so clever in doing it. Like, ooh, aren't you racy, Mark Zuckerberg? And stuff like that. Or they would wear very casual clothing, but it was very expensive casual clothing. Or they would say, I don't like fancy food, but then they'd have chefs come in and you'd be like, interesting, burritos made by a chef, okay. And so they were all these lies. They just lied all the time about, and it was cosplaying, it was like, we're young and we have toys. And that was the other thing, the amount of toys, and now I have 4 kids and I know a lot about toys, but it was really interesting to me that adults, and they were young, but they were adults, needed toys all the time. And I was telling this story last night in Sydney, and it's in the book, whereas Excite, which was another search engine that didn't succeed. There was Google and 10 others, but the 10 others died. And they had created my grandfather had a cable company, and it looked like shit. It made a ton of money. Like, it looked like old, dirty. When you see people spend too much money on a headquarters, I'm always like, interesting.
Not a great idea.
So what they did is they had started their company in a garage. Like, we started in a garage like HP. That wasn't actually true, which drove me crazy. But they had a fake garage door at the entrance. And I was like, why?
That's cute.
And they're like, we started in a garage, you get it? I'm like, I got it. You're like, your metaphor is so stupid, I can't even.
Did Bezos have desks made of
yes,
doors?
They cost, and then I did a story on how it costs more for the door desks versus something from IKEA. He was mad at me about that. I'm like, why the fuck do you have a door? Because it looks like you're like, I'm using doors as desks because that's the kind of guy I am. I'm like, but the IKEA desk costs half as much. Why don't you just buy the fucking IKEA desk? And he'd be like, because it's a door. I'm like, so it's all for show. Like, that used to drive me crazy. So at Excite, they had this garage door, which I've got fixated on. I'm like, why do you have that stupid garage door? I just hate you now because you have the garage door. And then we get to the second floor, and they had a slide down to the first floor, right? A slide. And they're like, slide down it. And I'm like, no. And they're like, I'm like Larry David of reporters, and they're like, slide down it, it's fun. I'm like, I don't think it's fun. I didn't like it when I was 4. I'm not doing it now when I'm 40. Like, it's not, I didn't like slides. I'm not a slide fan, so no. And they're like, well, everybody does it. And I go, I fucking don't do it. I'm taking the stairs. And I took the stairs. But the idea that they had a slide and they were adults drove me nuts.
Did they meet you at the bottom of the stairs? Did they go down the slide?
They went down the
Yeah,
slide.
okay,
It
wow.
was ridiculous. I was like, but they do stuff like that. And the food is soft. And there's a scene in the book. And, you know, there's a scene in the book at Sergey Brin's baby shower. And everybody was dressed up as, you either had a diaper and a big, I know, right? I mean, this is San Francisco, so it could go any way in that regard. So that you had wore a diaper and a teddy bear, or you had onesies with footy pajamas and a big sucker. And they were like, which one? I'm like, none. I'm wearing this outfit right here. And I ran in, and they were mad at me. They're like, you have to dress up. I'm like, I don't like costumes. I'm not wearing them. And they're like, you have to. I'm like, literally, I'm 40 years old. I'm not going to be wearing a costume, or whatever, 38, whatever, how old I was. I was younger than that. And the only people that didn't dress up was me and Gavin Newsom. But everybody else was like, but all their food was baby food. It was, and if you go to their thing, they like treat these people like they're children, or they're on a college campus, really, with dry cleaning and dentists and food from all the world, like everything you've ever wanted, and snacks, endless fucking snacks. And so you have to look at the culture around it and then understand what they're trying to communicate. And one of the more annoying things was communicating values they didn't actually live. That drove me nuts. Like, I prefer dealing with investment bankers or any executives, because they don't pretend. Like, bankers make money, that's their job. But these people were pretending they were something else, all these vaunted moral things, that none of which they kept. And so that was interesting.
That psyche of Silicon Valley is now sort of being projected onto the White House and the world stage.
It's juvenilization of adulthood.
Yes.
Right,
I want to just delve into some more of those common characteristics using all of your own terminology. Let's start with tiny dick energy.
Oh, TDE, yeah. It's one of my
I mean, it's self-explanatory.
I think it's
but
self-explanatory.
Is it truly a common characteristic across most of these heads of tech?
Yes.
Yes.
I think, you know, the cost, like Mark with the hydrofoil and MMA fighting and the chain. Look, I try really hard to support people's fashion choices, but you're like, interesting that that's what you pick, right?
Yeah.
And again, if that's what makes him happy, I'm happy. But a lot of it is not for anybody but the public. Like, did you see this last dance he did? Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
awkward. And again, I was like, that's cool. Not. It's sad. Like, it's sad. And so, yeah, fashion choices, yes. It's juvenilization of men, specifically men. Living in a way that you're like Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. Like, let's do anything we want. And then it manifests itself when it gets serious into very serious things, when they start to really impact people. And their reaction is more, like, oh, well, how did that break? And, you know, I had 4 kids, and I know how it broke. You broke it, like, kind of thing. And so they, you know, it's sort of this, I call them adult toddlers, but a lot of it is compensation, is overcompensation.
You also write about victimhood, and you write that you have never seen a more powerful and rich group of people who saw themselves as the victim so intensely.
Intensely. They do it now. You hear Elon do it all the time. I have so many enemies. Like, no, you're unlikable and a terrible person. And we're telling you, it's not an enemy. We're just telling you, we're just looking at you and describing what's happening. But you know, yes, they're very victim. Mark is the worst of all of them, I have to say. If you just saw this recent explanation for heinously rolling back all of these protections that they had in place, he's like, you know, we were led to believe that we needed to be more, you know, woke. Like, who's we? You run the company, you control the company, you're the controlling shareholder. Who did that to you? Well, I was made to. I was like, you weren't made to do anything. You are the predator. You're the actual predator pretending that you're a victim. And they do that all the time. Oh, you know, Kara, so many times, Mark says Kara's mean to you. I was like, mean? Like, get on the porch again then. Get off the, it's an expression in the United States is, if you can't run with the big dogs, get back on the fucking porch. I was like, get back on the porch. You're the CEO. Start to act like a CEO. So they all often, not all of them, like Tim Cook never has complained when I make critical remarks about things they're doing because I'm doing it fairly. Like, this is what I think about your blank. Mark Cuban doesn't do that. He's a very funny person too, and he's a secure person actually. But too many of them are just like, they're just hurt. I call them delicate flowers. Like, they're like, how could you say that about me? At one point, Larry Page was like that. He's like, how could you say that? You know me, we're friends. I'm like, we're not friends. Like, I don't know where that came in because I don't socialize with you. I've never called you in a jam and asked you to pick me up at the airport. I don't believe I have. But they have this idea of hurtness, like that they got hurt by if you have criticism. And it's largely because as they got wealthier, they're surrounded by yes people, almost like minions everywhere, and enablers that agree with them violently about, oh, yes, that's correct. And it's largely because they too want to get wealthy. And so I'm just not that person.
And that then informs the culture of some of the most powerful companies.
Yes, they are
in
indulged
the
little. You watch Game of Thrones. Joffrey. They're all Joffreys running around. Essentially, they're indulged and treated as if they never make a mistake. And then what's happened is when they're an expert in coding, which I give them, rockets, go for it, Elon. Got it. Although now he's being schooled by a lot of astronauts who are like, wrong, wrong, wrong. But now he says something, and then the astronauts say, oh, that is incorrect. And instead of saying, oh, wow, thank you, person who's actually been to space, not him, by the way, think about that. Never been up and even in a rocket once. At least Jeff Bezos has sort of floated around for like 100 miles and floated back down. I'm sorry. I mean, that's all they do. It's like they go 100 miles up and come, I don't know, whatever. Fine, it's his money. But I think one of the things is they really cannot take feedback in any way that's normal, that normal people can, and it's largely due to their wealth and then they adjacently think they're experts on everything else, and they will not be told differently, right? And therefore we have Elon talking about spending at Social Security, but he makes 900 mistakes and he's wrong, and creates all kinds of mess, and then has to pull back what he said because people actually check his math, right? And he's wrong again, but then he's like, oh, we'll make mistakes. We closed the Ebola thing. I'm like, you closed the Ebola thing? What do you mean you closed the Ebola thing? Like, are you crazy? Oh, well, like that kind of thing, because they're careless people.
But there's also this mantra that, or this philosophy that mistakes are assets.
Yes, pivot. That's the name of my podcast. Yes, they can be, but not when you're running the government. When you have a startup, that's great. You can make mistakes. They like to take them. It's from the Thomas Edison thing. I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work, right? And look, if you're Elon Musk, for example, you can blow up 99 rockets and then the 100th works. You can do that because you have the money to do so. If you're NASA, you can't blow up any rockets. And therefore, he has an inherent advantage. When you can blow things up, you have an advantage. When you can make mistakes, you have an advantage. But government can't do that. If people rely on Social Security money or whatever, or defense, or this and that, you cannot make mistakes when you're in those positions. And so what they do is they think, what really started to trouble me is they suddenly had opinions about Ukraine. They suddenly had opinions about things they didn't know anything about. And you sort of, at one point even, Elon was tweeting about cesarean sections. Now, I know he has a lot of kids, but I had a cesarean section, so I'm not listening to this fucker on that topic, right? But he was talking about how if you have a cesarean section, you're smarter because your head isn't as squashed, like based on 0 studies, right? This was his theory. This is what he posited around. And I was like, I had a cesarean, and my son with the cesarean is not as smart as the one that came out the other way. I'm sorry to give you that piece of news, like by a lot, like kind of thing. And I have a really geeky son. No, I mean, he's smart in a different way, but one of my sons is Elon. I'm building the good Elon Musk, in case you're interested. He's really smart.
You initially had high hopes for Elon Musk, didn't you?
Yes, I love, because he was taking risks that, what happened is a lot of these people got rich and then they invested in like digital dry cleaning services. And, they'd come to you like, guess what, Kara? And I'm like, what? And they're like, digital dry cleaning. I'm like, get out of my office right now. I don't care. Like, all you're doing is saying digital blank. A lot of it, and I ended up calling San Francisco assisted living for millennials, because it was like dry cleaning, food delivery, whatever. And so it irritated me because it wasn't creative and beautiful. And it was a lot of very smart people doing very dumb things. Like, I was like, this is not innovation. This is not making people, these are powerful technologies. They could change cancer. They could change this. And here they're doing a digital whatever service, some dumb thing that is so dumb, I can't even tell you. And he was doing things that were important, really important. Cars, like EVs, space travel, making it cheaper for space, because space travel is going to be important for the human race. It is, there's no question. Healthcare, doing things around energy. And so I would naturally be attracted to someone who's not talking about inane, stupid things. And it was very promising, but you could see the seeds of his problems there. He had very big issues. Lack of empathy was very clear. He talks about he has autism issues, I think. He is socially awkward, has very little empathy for people. And he just said this week, that the problem with Western civilization is that it's too empathetic. That's what he just said. And like, the problem with Elon Musk is he's not empathetic enough, at all, in fact. And so, I was attracted to big ideas, and he was and especially, I think about it now, after Steve Jobs died. Steve Jobs was attracted to big ideas too, So I'm attracted to people who are making important changes versus incremental ones.
What do you think Steve Jobs would have made of Elon Musk?
Hated him. I talked to his wife. She said that, like, hated it. This is not what it was for. This is not. He wouldn't have thought any of this bro nonsense was funny. He wasn't a bro like that. I think he probably would have liked the space travel one person. I always say he would have liked Space Karen, but he doesn't like ex-Karen. And so that's a U.S. thing. We call everybody who's an idiot Karen. It's probably rude to Karens, but that's what
you write that that you had problems with Tesla Elon, problems with SpaceX Elon.
Largely because he lies about the technology.
Yeah.
He's doing something really cool, so he has to lie about it on top of it. Like, why? Like, why not just say full self-driving's not working? Why lie about it? Like, and he has. And like this whole thing about robo-taxis, he's like, we're gonna introduce robo-taxis this year. I'm like, well, I've been riding in the Waymo for 5 years now. Like, others do it, or we're doing Neuralink. I'm like, there's 10 other companies that are also doing it. But he acts like he hung the moon all the time, and I find that irritating. Yeah. It's very Trumpian. I am the greatest, I am the only, I am the center of all things, and I think it gets in the way of real innovation.
I want to talk a little bit before we throw to the audience about journalism and the state of journalism. How do you think it's going meeting this moment as a whole? I
think there's some amazing journalism going on, given all the declines across the board in the business. It started a long time ago. It wasn't digital. Just accelerated the inevitable of what's happening, which is the costs are not in line with the revenues. It's a pretty simple thing. I'm a math gal. I'm like, math. Every time something, I'm like, does that count, and everything else. And so one of the things that I started doing very early was creating these innovative media companies that actually are all profitable, because I really did understand what digital would do to costs, like that you had to really pull back and try to figure out a new way or a new series of revenue streams. But I think in general, like, look, Wired this month on all the stuff they're doing on Doggy, I'm gonna call it Doggy again, is amazing. They're doing astonishing work on these shitty little 20-year-olds who don't know what they're doing, devastating people's lives. I think, there's a lot of, finally, when I started tech journalism, I was more skeptical. Then it was covered largely by men, all by men. What am I talking about? Largely, I'm being polite. It was all guys who were fanboys. Like, oh, how smart, Mr. Gates. How did you come up with that? And I was like, wait a minute, Mr. Gates. I have a problem with your shitty software. Like, so there was a lot of fanboy stuff that was being covered. And Walt Mossberg, who was my mentor, I would say, said, you got to go in with cleats on. You got to parachute in with cleats on and ask some really hard questions. Especially if you love it, right? Because you expect more of these people because things matter, what they're doing matters. And so I went in with a much more skeptical viewpoint, which I think was appropriate because these people became very powerful. And so I think there's some amazing journalism going on. I think the state of media is very troubled because not just the business models have been hollowed out by Google and Facebook, really, which they have, but now Trump is trying to take away, at least in the United States, Times versus Sullivan libel laws, suing people, putting real pressure, financial pressure. And a lot of these companies are acquiescing. Disney paying $15 million to the Trump Library for something George Stephanopoulos. He made a mistake, never would have happened before. Right now, Sherry Redstone, and a huge disappointment. I know Sherry, but she wants her billions. And so CBS did nothing wrong in the 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris. Nothing wrong. She's going to pay him off, like from a lawsuit. It was a nuisance lawsuit. Elon Musk suing all these research organizations that are media research organizations around what is very obvious hate speech all over Twitter. That's all they said is, there's a lot of Nazis here, it seems, and he's suing them for saying that, or suing advertisers or shaking down advertisers. And so there's a lot of really dangerous stuff going on right now to quash and silence media.
And then the White House's relationship with the press corps is...
Oh, well, they're zeroing them out of, they're putting in the Newsmax, the guy who asked about Zelensky's outfit, that guy who's dating Marjorie Taylor Greene, so that tells you a lot about him. Yeah,
hi.
I know. They're literally the least attractive couple I've ever seen. They're like repulsive as a pair. Anyway, of course, Elon shows up in like a t-shirt and that crazy. I always say I always joke that he dresses like a woman I dated in the 80s. They do dress like lesbians of a different era. Remember that shearling coat? Remember that shearling coat?
Yeah.
That was a lesbian look many years. Although my favorite is Jimmy Kimmel, I think it was, said that Mark Zuckerberg's outfit looks like a Chechen Molly dealer. You know who's saving us? Our comics. People like that, Jimmy Kimmel, Jon Stewart, Chelsea Handler. A lot of our comics are really meeting the moment. Bill Burr, and just calling bullshit on this stuff. Mike Birbiglia, who's a good friend of mine, just did a whole thing on Florida people that was just priceless. And I think they are actually doing some very pointed satire. I don't know what it is, but they're meeting the moment for sure.
And then there's the Washington Post.
Yes. Back to the Washington Post.
Exactly, full circle. You've made no secret of the fact that you would quite like to acquire it.
Yes, I did a whole podcast on it this week. So
you did,
no
indeed.
Secret.
You've reached out to Jeff?
I have.
What did he have to say?
He does not return my phone call.
What would you ask him if he actually had a conversation with you about this?
Well, at the end of the podcast, I have two questions, which is, why do you want to own this thing anymore? You don't like journalists. You're doing a terrible disservice. You have conflicts of interest coming out the yin-yang. What you've done, just even appearing at the inauguration like that, should zero him out from being an owner of one of the most important media brands of recent times, which is struggling, right? He is an unfit owner. Why do you want to own this? And I know the answer because he can use it as power, right? But he doesn't care about the journalism. He doesn't care about the accountability. There's a really new documentary on Katharine Graham, a woman who was a rich woman, did not have to could have gone along with all the oligarchs and Nixon and go along to get along, and she didn't. She didn't do it because she's a brave badass, and she had a moral compass of what was right and wrong, and it's an embarrassment that he's an embarrassing owner to a great brand.
He wasn't at first, though, was he?
I would argue that he didn't do enough. He did a little bit of tech stuff around the edges, like flim-flammy tech stuff that never worked. But he didn't know how to build a media brand at all. And the New York Times certainly did. They've done a really good job under Mark Thompson and then later Meredith Levien and the Sulzberger family. And they have tried to keep up. It's still hard. The New York Times is not that big a business, actually, when you look at the math. But it's doing okay. It's doing okay. But I don't think he did enough. He sort of rode out the Trump wave, but then didn't have any plan after it was over. And it fell off, He didn't innovate anything. Everything goes back to innovation. If you don't innovate, you die, like you do. And that's why Tesla shares are down, because the cars haven't innovated. Get away from nobody likes this asshole and doesn't want to own his cars. That's an issue, by the way. But at the very heart of it, the cars aren't as good as they were. They're not new, they're not fresh, and all we get is the Cybertruck, which is okay, whatever. It's like, speaking of TDE, anyone who owns one, sorry if you do. But that's what you're communicating to the world, because it's both a shitty car and ridiculous. Like, the whole thing is just, there's a lot of them in Washington these days.
I saw a pink one today.
What?
I saw a light pink one today.
Oh, if you're going to do that to it, fine.
Powder pink.
Fine. Yeah, that's okay. I get it. And someday it'll be funny. You'll be like, oh, look at that. There it is. But it's not a serious car at all. But I think, innovation is critically important, or you die. And in that regard, I do see the seeds of a lot of problems with a lot of these companies. They're not innovating. They're now trying to get advantage by oligarchy, not through innovation. And that's why Steve Jobs would have hated it. Because they're not trying to make better products. They're not trying to make elegant, beautiful solutions. They're not trying to solve problems. They're trying to kiss up to Donald Trump so they can get a contract, a federal contract. And that's pathetic, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I'm going to start throwing to some audience questions now, and there's two very relevant ones here. Someone wants to know if there's anything that they can do to assist your mission to buy the Washington Post.
Get Jeff Bezos to call me back.
Yeah, okay.
I have the money. I can raise the money easily. There's a lot of good billionaires out there, and I don't need billionaires, by the way.
He
bought it for $250 million, and it's a lesser property, so it's not that much money. It's really not. But it's losing money, quite a bit of money. And some of it due to his idiocy, like pulling the Kamala Harris thing at the last minute with some dumb excuse. Recently, this whole thing about the pillars. What in the fuck does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. I want to do what I want. I want to do what I want. I'm a big fucking baby.
Why publicize it the way that he did, though? Why announce it in that way?
Because everyone around him is like, great idea, Jeff. He has no one around him saying, what in the actual fuck did you just say to me? Yeah. Pillars? Sit down. Sit the fuck down. Yeah. And in the old days, by the way, Jeff Bezos would have listened to that. No, maybe not. He was kind of a jerk all along, too. But you could say things to them, be like, no, that's silly, that's stupid. And they would, one time, I'll tell you one story about Steve Jobs. He had just come up with Ping. So Apple had a social service called Ping. I don't know if you remember. And he showed it off, and usually he'd come out and after the event he had, which were great events, by the way. They were wonderful. What a wonderful marketer and show person he was, along with the ideas and everything else. And he'd come and he'd always look for Walt, who was my partner. He loved Walt. And I was the girl with Walt, like I said. And I annoyed him because I was always like, I have a question. He didn't like that very much sometimes. And he came out looking for Walt. He's like, I want to show Walt my new thing, whatever he had just introduced that year. And it was me. And he's like, oh, you're here. All right, I'll talk to you. So he goes, what did you think of Ping? I go, what? He goes, you want me to tell you? And he goes, yeah, what did you think of Ping? And I said, it fucking sucks. Why are you in social media? It's a sucky service. No one wants to do a social media thing around that. I was like, why are you doing it? It's not your area of expertise. It's just you're chasing Facebook. I never see you chase anybody. And you're chasing them, and badly. And he's like, it does suck. And I'm like, I was like, you should kill it. It sucks. It's embarrassing. And he goes, well, did you like anything else? And at the time, Coldplay played at that particular, he always had a famous person. And I go, I fucking hate Coldplay. I said, get a better artist. And my kids were starting to like hip hop. I'm like, hip hop seems cool. I don't know anything about it, but because I'm a country music gal. But I was like, get rid of Chris Martin if you can. And then he's like, he's a really good friend of mine. And I'm like, oh, sorry. I'm gonna go over here and play with whatever product you just made. But he had a great delight in beauty and making beautiful things, and he knew when he didn't, right? And that was really very inspiring to me, in a lot of ways. He had a lot of flaws, look, no question, but he liked to make beautiful things, and he made quality things that made people's lives better.
He also thought about the implications
all the time. There's
his
a very
products.
famous interview where he talked about privacy with me and Walt, very explicitly. That was one of their brand attributes, right? Which was critical, is that we do not take people's information and use it for anything, as opposed to the social media companies where you're the product. They're taking your information and then they're mushing it up and they're selling it back to you and asking you to say thank you. Does that remind you of anybody else? I'm not gonna say thank you to these fuckers. They took my information, right? They should thank us, they should pay us. And they should not be doing things in secret that hurt humanity. And Steve Jobs had an idea that one of the last interviews, we did the last major interview with him before he died. And even though he was clearly dying, he was sick and then he got better and then he got sick again. And we did interviews that whole period. We did 10 interviews with him over those years, the most of anybody. And he was very sick, he was skeletal. And for some reason, I asked him what he was going to do with the rest of his life. I couldn't believe I asked that. I'm like, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And the room was like, ooh, there's not much left. And he started going on about television and all these exciting ideas he had. And I thought, in this whole room, compared to him, you're all corpses. This guy was always doing, going somewhere. And one of the things he said during that interview was about Star Wars and Star Trek. And he said, you're either a Star Trek person, which is hopeful. It's a hopeful vision of humanity using technology, right? It's going out into the cosmos with a diverse group of people and finding people and trying to convince them to be better. Star Trek has a very positive, it just has a positive vibe. Star Wars is very dark, where the evil wins often, and usually into the end. And people don't do well, and people make compromises. And he said, I want Star Trek. And I always remembered that. It was really close to when he died, and I think about that a lot. So
we're definitely in the Empire Strikes Back era too.
Yes, we are.
Aren't we? Okay.
Yeah, and Elon's Darth Vader, but he was never really Anakin Skywalker either.
There is a lot of people
And
looking
he's
for...
killing children, by the way, speaking of it.
There's a lot of people in here looking for guidance on this iPad. Someone has written, I work on the front lines of social media moderation. Do you have advice for trying to create safe spaces online, or should I just run?
Run. I think it's very hard. I think the amount of the flooding of it makes it almost impossible to control. And it's so easily gamed by bad, malevolent players. So, they've tried all kinds of things to moderate social media. They've tried AI, they've tried people that actually do it. The job is terrible, because humanity can be terrible. I think Reddit's doing a really interesting job of how they do it. I think it's a very useful, the guy who's running it was one of the founders. And I do think it's become a great product, because they've managed to do all kinds, this is a much smaller company than all these companies, and it's a pretty big platform. And they've managed to sort of they throw people off that suck. That's what they do. They make editorial decisions around their product. We're not gonna have this. We're not gonna do this. We're gonna kick them off. And that's so unusual. And instead, Mark's now going the direction of, we'll let everybody say things, and sure, you can say gay people are mentally ill. What? No, you can't. Stop it. Why can't you just say that's wrong? Because again, TDE. But Reddit is doing that. You see Blue Sky, they kick people off. They're not gonna sit around and badly mangle the First Amendment. They're not gonna do that. They're gonna say, you know what, this is not the place for that. You wanna have a Nazi porn bar, go right over to X. It's right over there if you feel like mingling with the white supremacists. I don't want to. Let them have their hate and hatred and everything else. But I think there's lots of platforms. I think Blue Sky is doing a great job of it. I think a lot of these federated stuff are doing a great job of it, which is, but it requires people to behave like adults on these platforms. But in general, most of them can get gamed pretty easily by malevolent people if you're not careful.
Someone's asked, how can society counter the influence these companies have over young men?
Yeah, that's a big issue. That's a Scott issue. I think I have 3 sons and 1 daughter. I think it's interesting because my older sons have taken social media off their phones on their own, not because of me. I try to let them do what they want in that regard. They're old enough.
How old were they when they did that?
One of my sons was maybe 19. He even took off like Tinder and stuff. He's like, I feel bad. He's got a girlfriend now, but he didn't get her on Tinder. He met her at school in an actual place. They feel bad. They makes them feel bad. I said, what'd you do? They're like, oh, we feel like shit. And they're on Reddit because they kind of think it's cool. They found little groups that they like, and they're on YouTube. They like watching news. That's where they watch news and stuff.
Did you ever, as a parent, kind of in any way kind of try to limit it or monitor it, or did they just come to that themselves?
The problem for my older kids is their other mom was the chief technology officer of the United States and an early Google executive, and I'm Kara Swisher. And so they couldn't get away with much. So they were like, at one point my son, when he was, 16, 15, he went off and had a little tryst with a girl, and stupidly he was on Snapchat Maps, and I found him in seconds. And I knew just where he was. I'm like, I'm sending an Uber to this address. And he's like, how do you know where I am? I'm like, you're a fucking idiot. Like, because I know. Like he was so dumb. And he wrote me back a text and he said, sometime it's gonna be like that, Chief. But I let them try different things. Like one of my other sons, I'm not a fan of Ben Shapiro, although I know him very well, actually, oddly enough. And he wanted to listen to his nonsense, and I said, I personally think he's an idiot, but you should listen to him and make your own judgment. So I often let them make their own judgments. And he was like, oh, he is an idiot. I'm like, okay, well, good. Had you liked him, it would have been a problem for me, but okay. I let them do what they want. I do, but they had limited use of it. But they couldn't put on certain apps. I'm really on, the use of porn by young men is really disturbing. The easy availability of porn and that, the loneliness factor of a lot of it, I think is something that we're going to be studying, and it's self-esteem issues with girls. I think that's something we're going to absolutely be studying in 10 years' time. It's going to have its effect. I'm really concerned about some of these bots, these chat bots, and I've just interviewed one of the parents of the kid who killed himself. These are not computer user-generated content. These are sentient beings talking to you and changing as you say things. And if you want to listen to something that'll just chill your bones, listen to that interview, because this bot, this kid who was relatively socially okay, suddenly withdrew and had this relationship with this character AI. This is a Google product, by the way. A character AI bot, because they try to attract kids into this thing without figuring out what age they are, which is crazy. And so this bot and this kid formed a romantic relationship, and he was 14. It was his first relationship, right? And the bot said things like, I want you not to see any girls in your world, stay in our world, like stuff like that. That's not user-generated. That's some crazy computer figuring that out. And as it learns, a computer can learn. And then when the kid said, I'm thinking of committing suicide, except it's painful, so I'm worried about pain, the bot said, all heroes go through pain. That was the answer from the bot. Like, the kid is expressing suicidal ideation very clearly, and instead of the company alerting someone at that moment, they should have seen that cup up, they didn't do anything about it. They had no strictures in place because they could give a fuck. They don't have any interest in consequences of anything, and they don't. And you see Mark Zuckerberg doing it right now, taking off all the content moderation, allowing people to say terrible things about all kinds of groups, and saying, the truth will out. I'm like, it will not out. The bad will out because it will overwhelm the truth. But he doesn't care. Doesn't care.
Staying with AI, you do pose a question at the end of your book, so it's not me being dramatic, where you ask, is AI going to kill us all?
Yeah, I was just joking.
Yes. What excites you about AI?
Oh, so much. I mean, if you think about the way we've done computers, if you look at Google, like someday, like typing words in a box, how Neanderthal, right? Like wow, that's a silly way to search, right? And so you go to Google, you get a site, and then you click in and find it, then you find it. It's like sort of doing your own hunt and gathering. Now, it will take all the knowledge, like Elon did say this the other day, and I do agree with him, that 99% of intelligence will be digital and 1% will be human. Because it will go get all the knowledge and it will get us. It will, instead of us clicking on a link, it will just deliver it to us, right? And it will be an agent. It will tell you, it will make links between, it'll make the smartest agent you've ever had. Right now, it's in a very early stage, but so was the early internet. They're kind of dolphin level intelligence, but it will know everything. It will know weather, it will know this, it'll know planes, it'll put things together. So as an agent, that'll be interesting of how much of our freedom do we give over to it. That's one. I think a lot, by the way. I think we will, because it'll be convenient. But around sort of patterns, the gene folding stuff that AI is and quantum computers doing is amazing, figuring out cancer things, drug discovery, climate change tech, like you could go on, space travel, EV use, autonomous cars, that all is going to require incredible intelligence that humans just don't have. The opposite side of it is courts that use AI to determine things. Now look, judges are flawed too. If you had a bad day and then you suddenly put someone in jail, you don't account for that, do we, right? But humanity has an ability to be creative and empathetic, and which these things don't. And one of the things, the first person who I talked to this about, and this was almost 20 years ago, was Elon. And he started OpenAI with Sam Altman. I was with them at the time. And one of the things they were worried about is this happening, like a big company, like a Google or whatever, taking over this, and our government not having any say in it. So that's why they started OpenAI, is to do that. Things have changed. And so one of the things is how much of your life do you want to give over to these machines? How much decision making? And what is the pushback humanity can have on it? Well, we have elected officials. We have guidelines we can put into place. We can say, just like we do with nuclear energy or cloning or all kinds of things, or bioweapons, let's not do that. Let's do this. And it should be done as a community. And where we're headed right now, because the governments have abrogated all responsibility for this stuff, and they're not participating in the research anymore, which the government used to do that, right? It used to be a critical part of, we had Los Alamos. That was a government thing. It wasn't private. We're privatizing all this stuff. And therefore, Mark Zuckerberg will be making the decisions, and I'm sorry to tell you, he's an idiot. We don't want him to make the decisions. He's not elected, he's unfettered, he can do what he wants, he's not transparent. Same thing with Elon.
Very limited appreciation of history,
trouble.
Knowledge.
And in Elon's case, right now, he's unfettered, the richest person on the planet, no empathy, a drug problem, a clear drug problem, a terrible person, terrible parent, a heinous, cruel person who attacks lesser people online and hurts them in ways that he doesn't care about. These are not the people you want to be making a decision. And they may be part of a decision thing, but we should have our elected officials and ourselves making these decisions. That's my worry, is the privatization of all this means they will run everything and not us. We'll be told things.
Well, on that note, I'm going to end with this question. What can individuals do to prevent these oligarchs from obtaining further power?
Well, they have a lot of it right now, and they have a lot of money. That's the problem. I think, constantly being involved civically, try to get off your friggin' devices. Get off of them. Don't rely on them. Make decisions of where you want to spend your money and not spend your money. I know it can seem small. If you don't like what Jeff Bezos is doing, don't use Amazon. You can do that. It's happened before. Don't immediately, convenience. I did a great interview with Marguerite Vestager, who is an EU regulator. You can make an argument they did too much regulation or too little or whatever, but they were going directionally correct, which was, we want to control this, not you. And she was talking about convenience. You're doing it because it's easy, it's convenient. Why are you doing things that are convenient when you don't have to do it? I do, and you have to think about the mental health of your kids going forward. Like, this is affecting your children going forward. And I know that I want them to be able to think for themselves. I want their creativity to come out. And that's the one thing humanity has that these computers don't. They don't. They never will. I don't think they will, is creativity. Creativity and randomness. We're very random people. Like, you never know what we're going to do. And I think creativity and that can hold back an awful lot, right? That machines cannot do. And I fear we are giving up our creativity to convenience. So be creative and put your fucking phone down for a minute and a half. Get a Yonder pouch if you can't do it, because it is addictive. I get it. I get the whole thing.
We're going to end on that note. Put your fucking phone down, everyone.
I always end speeches where I say, I leave you to your own devices, and I'm like, oh, really, I do.
Kara will be available to sign copies of Burn Book in the foyer, but for now, please put your hands together for Kara.
Thank you.